We like to describe our report as a carefully edited collection of U.S. news headlines, papers across the country, summarized for you in one place. We do it here every day. Here's our top story. We end up talking about the economy every day. We have all seen our mutual fund statements, but it's still a striking number on the front page of the Wall Street Journal. 18% of the wealth of American families evaporated last year. That calculation came yesterday from the Federal Reserve. At the top of the front page of the Journal, the admission from Bernie Madoff. The Journal headline calls his Ponzi scheme an epic scam. The New York Times coverage on this says victims got few answers about who might have helped Madoff to steal their money. The story says the hearing made clear that Mr. Madoff is refusing to help the government build a case against anyone else. Madoff said it all started in the recession in the early 1990s when he tried to top up investor returns temporarily. It became impossible, he said, to catch up. New York Post columnist Andrea Pizer asks how anyone could say it was impossible to stop stealing. His victims are all across the country. The stories on the front pages across the country. The Detroit News showing the tiny jail cell that has replaced his penthouse apartment. There was a particularly high concentration of Madoff investments in Minnesota. The Star Tribune headline this morning is straight to jail. The Miami Herald says Madoff's wife, Ruth, may be the next to leave the apartment. A matrimonial lawyer says she will have to prove some of her assets are untainted, and the lawyer says that is going to be very hard. Two puzzling stories up next. I spotted both in the New York Daily News. They're in other papers, too. First on page 92. This is the oddest photo of the day. Pro golfer Hendrik Stetson at the CA Championship in Florida. He was in the mud. He says he was worried his clothes would get muddy, so he stripped down to his underwear to make his shot. He was asked about this later. He says, I had no option. I think there might have been another option. And this one, I couldn't agree more with the headline on the Sears Tower story. It says they're going to call it what? The British insurance company Willis is going to turn the tallest building in America into the Willis Tower. Here's how it plays out on the front page of the Chicago Tribune, where they look at the old Sears Tower every day. The main story includes interviews with people who suspect that Chicago residents will just keep calling it the Sears Tower. Another building in the news, the Washington Post has a review of the ugliness of U.S. embassies. Many of them were designed at the height of concerns about terrorism that has left the country with an ugly and unwelcoming presence in many countries. In California, 3 people have been charged with giving Anna Nicole Smith addictive prescription drugs prior to her death by overdose. Among the papers covering the story, the Houston Chronicle in her home state. California Attorney General Jerry Brown said her former boyfriend, Howard K. Stern, and 2 others helped her to get thousands of prescription pills, often, he said, for no legitimate medical purpose. Big story in Miami. The Obama administration will allow Cuban Americans to visit relatives at home once a year. The old policy allowed trips every 3 years with more restrictions. A story about child hunger in India is on the front page of the New York Times today. For reference here, in China, 7% of children under the age of 5 are underweight. 42% of Indian children are underweight. The Philadelphia Inquirer notes the loss of billionaire philanthropist Lenore Annenberg. The governor of Pennsylvania calls Lenore and her late husband Walter the best philanthropists in the history of Philadelphia. Trouble is, with the passing of Mrs. Annenberg, the next generation of the family's in California, and they're moving the foundation there. Asked whether there will be special consideration for Philadelphia giving in the future, the best answer the executive director could give was, I don't know. Jon Stewart and Jim Cramer had their showdown last night. It was Stewart who scored all of the points. USA Today's back on the story today. In fact, the opening for The Daily Show last night made fun of the fact that USA Today had really played up the face-off in advance. The story in the paper today says Stewart's questioning was aggressive, repeatedly blasting the channel, CNBC that is, for cheerleading Wall Street. Octomom is on page 11 of the New York Post today. The Post says she's going to need more. She's buying diapers. Now, if you haven't purchased diapers, I can tell you this looks to me like maybe a 20 or 30 pack. That might be enough for Nadia Suleiman and her 8 kids to get to tomorrow. Basketball, they kept playing and playing. 6 overtimes, the longest game in Big East tournament history. The Syracuse team beat Connecticut 127-117 in the men's quarterfinals. Both of these teams are expected to qualify for the NCAA tournament, which starts next Thursday. Finally, a man from Seattle thought he had all the angles covered. He built a dummy out of plastic pipe, foam, and an old Halloween mask. Then he dressed it in a jacket and baseball cap. He put it in his passenger seat as his ticket to driving in the HOV lane. He missed one detail. He didn't buckle the seatbelt. The police officer spotted the unbuckled passenger seatbelt, decided to follow the car for a while. That's when it became very clear that the second passenger in the car had not moved a muscle. We invite you to come back every day to get all the top news from U.S. newspapers at patspapers.com. On our website, you'll find links to all the stories that I've featured today.